Hey everybody, it's Natalie Bensavanga, and I am back with, my goodness, another edition of Facts Over Fear, because we've got one hell of a story coming out today that we just had to discuss. So we're going to get right into it. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is reportedly preparing to categorize transgender people as violent extremists, a categorization supported by organizations affiliated, of course, with none other than Project 2025, including the Heritage Foundation. Now, according to a report from September 18th by independent journalist Ken Klippenstein, two anonymous national security officials said that the Bureau is discussing treating trans subjects as a subset of a new threat category, Nihilistic Violent Extremists, NVEs, which they created earlier this year. Now, the Bureau is defining this as Nihilistic Violent Extremism as criminal conduct in furtherance of political, social, or religious goals that derive primarily from a hatred of society at large and a desire to bring about its collapse by sowing indiscriminate chaos. Whew! Sophia Zoe Kilmer, a human rights attorney and trans rights activist, is joining me. We have so much to unpack with this. Sophia, first of all, how are you?
That question could take all day.
I know.
We'll just talk about the stuff.
Okay. That's fair.
I'm as well as to be expected.
Sophia, let's back up though, because we didn't just get to this point overnight. What is the obsession with trans people that the right seems to have? Because trans people have always been here. They've always existed. So why now? Why this moment? What is this about, do you think?
That's a much bigger picture, but the way I would sew it up is that trans people, to the far right ideologues who've put Trump in power, these Heritage Foundation people, and at this point, no one's talking conspiracy people. Just look at who and what they're doing. It's all in the open, and you guys just have to acknowledge it or not. Read 1984 while you can, or don't. I think that I feel like the right ideologue essentially wants women barefoot and pregnant and back at home. Yeah. And all trans people essentially serve as some sort of elevator or escalator for all of us to really truly choose our identities. Even if it's only 1% of us that really have these feelings, we all are allowed and acknowledged to have them. And in that way, truly, Natalie, you really choose your gender of being a woman, because you have this other option that if you had these thoughts, society wouldn't, at least the society we used to live in, castigate you, destroy you, exterminate you, because these are natural thoughts and these are just like your soul. And so honestly, I feel that the far right wants to deprive all women of these opportunities. Because honestly, Natalie, if you had these trans thoughts, and I don't want to say that this is something that you can choose, you just choose whether or not to acknowledge them or not.
Yeah.
And so truly, I think this is really, honestly, we're 1% of the population. This is a further attack on all women. That's the truth.
I couldn't agree more. And I wanted to add this, Sophia, I thought you might appreciate this. Lately, I've been getting a lot of trolls online that have been calling me trans. And
I think insane.
Yeah, and I think
obviously gorgeous, but so am I.
That's right. I think the reason that they're doing that is because I stand in my power, which they associate with the masculine and not with the feminine. And so to your point, what you're saying is if you're not performing femininity in the way that aligns with their very narrow and very, subversive worldview, then you too can be categorized in a way where then they can start to strip you of your rights. And so when we talk about feminism, when we talk about intersectional feminism, it has to include the LGBTQ community, because it reflects on all of us and all of our rights. If one of us falls, we all fall, right? So to your point, we must be intersectional in how we approach this. So I wanted to get into this FBI categorization. Why is this not only dangerous that they're doing this, these nihilistic violent extremists category, but also just inherently false?
Ultimately, it comes down to the idea of sowing doubt in the populace. I think they know down in their hearts that this is truly and completely unconstitutional. Me and my for Defend Trans Rights will be working on this, along with, I'm sure, the larger groups like the ACLU. This is really, and this is what I want to hammer home to everyone, this is a larger attack on all of our gender expression, really. And so, how do you possibly identify someone, honestly, who is just transgender, which we have Supreme Court case laws on this at this point, people. Trans people, we exist. We've always existed. We're not some sort of nihilistic group. And in fact, what they've done is they've rebranded what was used against the J6ers, and they're now trying to use it against people who are trans. And there is absolutely no tie to anything that's going on with the trans community. They wish that there was. I have seen absolutely nothing that is hardcore solid evidence, and I'm saying not hearsay.
And so let's talk about how this is relating to the moment in time that we're at right now with the Charlie Kirk assassination. They're basically trying to tie this trans identity with the shooter or with the shooter's roommate. But we know, Sophia, that at least a half a dozen hoaxes have claimed that trans people were responsible for mass shootings and other incidences since 2012. There is no evidence to suggest significant patterns of violence committed by trans people. In fact, in 2024, the Gun Violence Archive's executive director, Mark Bryant, said that out of 5,000 mass shootings tracked by this archive, the number of trans or LGBTQ suspects is in the literal single digits. So explain to me the, once again, obsession with trying to connect dots that aren't even there between Kirk's assassination and this non-violence violence that they're trying to perpetuate and put onto trans people.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if they had anything that was like what we would call in the law, like evidence, they would be presenting it. And honestly, everything they've presented you so far is hearsay. That is going to be very difficult to authenticate, and I would like to see it authenticated. I would like to see people like you as a journalist, Natalie, to subpoena certain records. If you want to have the exact way that I would go about proving whether or not this person was trans, I can give you that. But I would also point out, you should subpoena the records from the cell phone carrier. Everyone should, to be able to just, I don't know, make sure that the metadata checks up to what the FBI is telling us. Because when the FBI is run by the people who used to be the conspiracy theorists, you might start wanting to, Kadesh Patel is a person who was known very long on the right side, very far right side, as being a person who peddled in conspiracies. I didn't say that, journalists have.
And I really want to go back to what you were bringing up, because this was a very good point around the text threads, whether or not those texts are actual truth or not. Once again, to your point, this is all hearsay. Anything. Sure. And what we need to remember here is that we have to base what our laws and our policies are on evidence. And to your point, we're not seeing a lot of evidence. We're hearing a lot of things coming out of different camps for different reasons. And part of those reasons are to further these agendas. So I want to talk a little bit more about what the Heritage Foundation is doing. They're also claiming that trans people are behind 50% of school shootings. They were only able to name 4 actual cases, 0 of which those cases were motivated by anti-trans sentiments. They're calling this, though, transgender ideology-inspired violent extremism. It's called derive. And associated with derive is terminology that they say that people use who are associated with this group called derive that they've created. And the terminology includes words like cisgender, phrases like right to exist, misgendering. My gosh, Sophia, when I saw this, what concerned me a lot about this was the fact that they were trying to take language that is affirming to a human being's identity, that shows their right to exist, that being the phrase, and turn it into something evil and something that people should be, alarmed by? So certain people, are they saying they don't have the right to exist? And so this is what is being set up by the Heritage Foundation. Does this concern you as we've moved into a year where the rhetoric has so quickly turned against trans people, are you worried about further erasure in not only public spaces, but from legal protections being eroded as well?
I'm concerned, but I'm also like waiting for it and like waiting for the reaction to it. Because I remind you, as we wait for now,
Yeah.
so certain Supreme Court cases, that these people aren't infallible.
Let's move on a little bit and talk about what's happening right now with the Supreme Court, because there always seems to be something every single day, Sophia, that we could talk about. But this one has me really concerned. Trump is asking the Supreme Court to block trans people from changing their gender markers. What does this mean?
On their visas.
Thank
what
you.
He can.
So talk a little bit about this, and what does this mean?
Absolutely. And so just to make it, just in general, a transgender person would go through the process of changing their birth certificate or any sort of gender markers that the U.S. had allowed and still has processes to essentially allow you to change your gender marker, which is still currently the law. But essentially we have a situation where a lot of people just want to tell other people what to do. And in this particular case with the Supreme Court, we have a situation where they do the Trump and his executive order. He wants it to have like the actual effect of a law. And I don't see how this Supreme Court gets to that decision. No other Supreme Court has. It is a true violation of multiple rights for trans people. It just is. But it's also a greater understanding of the idea of the supremacy clause and the idea, not even supremacy clause, the separation of powers and the idea that, yes, we have a Congress and they pass laws, and those are the laws that are in effect. And just so everyone understands, the Supreme Court case right now on precedent, I don't know, maybe they'd have to overturn themselves. Bostock versus Clayton County, 2020, where it felt that transgender people do exist. We do exist, and we're entitled to protections at work. I don't know how you make us essentially a terrorist organization and classify us as all of that when we have protections at work and protections to work. So, at some point, the rubber hits the road, and these people have to decide, are they, do they want to basically become the representation of the Klan?
So I want to talk more about the gender markers as it pertains to what is going on with passports. Can you elaborate on why this is so problematic?
I mean, for trans people and for society in general, one, I would say it's a direct violation of Bostock versus Clayton County for the President of the United States to create a law that explicitly discriminates against 1% of the population. Additionally, for the rest of you Americans just listening, I want you to understand that a far-right ideologue group and political movement has come to power. And they've come to power, and in this power, quickly, they've taken over the mass media. And on top of that, they're starting to target very specifically 1% of the population, okay? And this particular population is trans people. Just keep listening to this. Okay, they're now using the courts to, without really changing our constitution or laws, just change what the laws and the words mean. Like now, apparently we're all, being anti-fascist is a terroristic group. But like, if we actually talk about the definition of fascism, fascism is just like a far-right movement that is characterized by an authoritarian dictator who has control over the business, the mass media, and your life. And like, we all used to be anti that. I would love to put a poll down at the bottom and say, like, is fascism bad? Because like, that's the definition. So what is the Supreme Court going to do? At some point, we all need to understand that this means something when we decide it does. Okay?
The Constitution.
So like, absolutely. Yeah, the United States Constitution only has the meaning of the words we ascribe to it. And so everyone, we the people, live under this. Okay? This is the most important thing in the entire world to us. It really is. And the Supreme Court's job is to interpret this, okay? But we have brains. And we have a responsibility as we the people to make sure that they're interpreting the words the way they really mean. And so when we all sit here and we understand what freedom of speech means, and that means freedom of expression, and that includes gender expression, let's all just understand that when they start to attack 1% of our population's gender expression ability, they're attacking it for all of us.
And directly when something like this happens, could this mean that like you wouldn't be able to travel? I mean, outside of the United States, if this were to come into fruition with the passports?
A person who had not changed their gender marker on their passport did not have a passport would have a hard time. It makes our life very hard, and it also denies us the ability that we have a constitutional right to, which is to change our gender marker, until the federal government says we can't, because there is no law like that on the books right now, and there is currently law that says we can. And so ultimately, I think this is going to come down to an issue of separation of powers as well. I have sat here for a very long time and said that I don't believe that the executive has the right through these executive orders to essentially create law, like congressional law. And so like what he does have an ability to do is certain pulling of the funding and strings. I'll let them get into that. But he doesn't have the ability to like, I don't think even Congress right now has the ability to create a domestic terrorist group that is nothing more than expression of words and like beliefs. So I would question that is also unconstitutional. But I would come back to the idea that we the people decide what freedom of speech means to us. And we do that by like, get into like Disney and all that. But like, we the people make those decisions.
Sophia, I just want to wrap this up by asking you, what do you want to say to the trans community right now? Because I do think a lot of people are scared. I think they are afraid of what's coming. Not only are they being erased, but now they're being vilified. And these feelings, they're not allowed to express them because they're afraid. So what do you want to say to people right now from the trans community who may be feeling scared?
First and foremost, I sit here as your sister, your trans sibling, someone who is going through the same daily struggles that you are. With, in my opinion, God's test of us and our understanding of our own soul, the universe and our understanding of our own soul. You get that if you're trans, and I'll leave it at that. But what I will say is stay strong. We are part of a great and powerful movement that has existed forever, but essentially this is the civil rights movement. And while it's trans people today, it's not just trans people. And when you hear DEI, don't say it that way. Say it is diversity, equality, and inclusion. Because when you say those words and then you say I'm anti that, you sound like an asshole.
Yeah.
So why don't we say words? And join us on November 5th in Washington, D.C., where we're going to be to constitutionally exercise our freedom of speech right to essentially oppose this regime and this essentially, the executive, Trump. We're allowed to oppose him, and we should. Continue to exercise your freedom of speech until someone tries to tell you don't have it, and then decide if you really believe that this means anything. But that's not to the trans community. That's just to everybody. To the trans community, you are part of everybody. Love goes out to you.
Thank you so much for taking time and sharing your expertise and also what's on your heart and what you wanted to share with the community at large. I appreciate you.
That's how you put love out to someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you. Right back to you, baby.
Thank you. More of this.
More of that.
Big Swiftie here.
Oh, everybody, if you want to connect with Sophia and or myself, you can check us out on our Substacks, on our Instagrams, TikToks, YouTube channels. We're kind of in all the spaces because we belong in all the spaces as women. So thank you again for joining us. And as always, everyone, please take care of yourselves and each other.